Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable. He looks like he doesn't have a man who has nothing left to prove to himself. You know, when he walks into that RNC room, just with this, I don't know, I'm the last person who would expect myself to be talking this way, but with this kind of serenity about him. I mean, like, I was kidding, sort of, about God endorsing Donald Trump with this moment. But if you believe, as I do, that God intervenes in history and not just sculpts the world, but also personally takes a hand in it, it's almost impossible. Whatever intentions you want to attribute to God, or whether you want to leave that unknown, it is impossible to look at that video and not just think, there's like, you're watching divine intervention in real time. Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I'm your host for the week, Spencer Clavin, associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books and super special Sparkle Bus editor of the American Mind. I am joined this week by managing editor Seth Barron and publisher and president Ryan Williams. Well, it's the week of the Republican National Convention, which means there have been a whole bunch of high-profile endorsements rolling in for Donald Trump, the presumptive nominee. We've had former primary opponents like Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. We've heard from some unlikely celebrities, such as the former stripper and video vixen Amber Rose. But perhaps the most surprising endorsement came from another source altogether. The Lord God Almighty, best known to many for his work as creator of the universe and his controversial decision to become incarnate in his son Jesus Christ and die for the sins of all mankind upon the cross, has made his voting preferences known on Saturday by personally reaching out his hand from on high and swiveling the head of Donald Trump by several degrees as he spoke at a rally in Pennsylvania, so that a bullet from a would-be assassin, Thomas Matthew Crooks, whizzed past, striking his ear instead of going through his head and sending us onto an extremely different and much darker timeline. Of course, rather bleak altogether, just the same, but quite different in tone and mood, especially as Trump himself fought his way back to the podium to raise up his fist, capturing what must be, if not the most iconic image of my lifetime politically in America, certainly in the top 5, raising his fist, yelling, "Fight, fight, fight," as the American flag waved behind him and blood streamed down his ear. Huge host of questions yet unanswered in the wake of this momentous and really awful event. Not that much known about Crooks just yet, although he has been taken out after a series of blunders, severe blunders by the Secret Service, and many fingers pointed at Director Kimberly Cheadle, Biden appointee, who has yet to step down. She's claimed that the problem with covering the roof where Crooks was positioned was that there was a slope that might have made it unsafe for the agents to be there. So certainly a reckoning to come on the failures of the Secret Service, or at least we would assume. And a tense atmosphere in the air as people wonder whether we might be in for retaliations or political violence. On the other hand, there's been, I would say, a definite transformation in the vibe after this event, and certainly in reaction to Trump's own response. He's appeared at the RNC with a bandage on his ear, looking for all the world as if he has sort of touched death and returned in enlightenment. You get the impression of like Dostoevsky after his sentence was commuted, writing to his brother about how the joy of life has transformed all things for him. There's clearly been some really tight messaging control around this RNC to lean into the idea that, in fact, Trump is now the unity candidate, that we should rally around him. And others, I think, seem to feel a certain degree of permission to do so now that they hadn't before. Altogether, if you have to go through a horrifying event like this one, seems like we narrowly missed a lot of much worse possibilities. But what do you guys think? Big deal. What are your reactions?
Well, I mean, tremendous relief. I mean, that was the most. I mean, people talk about that we're now in like the two timelines that diverged at that moment. And it's just so horrifying to think of what would have happened had it gone the other way. I mean, one, yes, okay, we would have felt that he was a martyr. But I mean, walking around New York City and listening to all of the politicians, like, making their noises about how, oh, this was terrible. But I mean, knowing how gleeful they would have been and how ecstatically happy they would have been. I mean, this was like the their repressed shadow emerging. This like Crooks fellow, this like twisted, lonely deviant. Like he makes like Lee Harvey Oswald seem like a fun guy to invite to a party. He's just so awful. And the thought that he really embodied the desires of the Democrats. I mean, they would have been so excited if Trump was dead. They would have loved it. There would have been no stopping them. And I don't care how much they would deplore violence. They would have just been so delighted. And then who knows? Maybe who knows what we would have done on our side, but maybe they would have won and felt that they were vindicated. It's just so terrible. I don't know why I keep thinking about that. The fact that he providentially turned his head at that instant, like, thank God. Regarding the Secret Service, I mean, the questions keep piling up, and more it is seeming like, I don't know what was going on, but my initial thought about it was like, they probably didn't like hire this guy to shoot Trump, but it wouldn't surprise me if Mayorkas and this woman in charge of the Secret Service just kind of between themselves were like, okay, well, let's just, we have to give Trump a security detail, but let's go through and figure out like who just got back from maternity leave, who has a drinking problem, who are the ones who are on the way out. I mean, that certainly would be within their power. Like, just give them the C team. And now it's emerged, a lot of them were substitutes and maybe not used to it. Heads have got a role in the Secret Service, but I don't know. I'm just very thankful. Yes, and I agree. Trump does seem like somewhat there is something kind of like there's like a transfiguration, like a weird kind of mellowness. But and I'm sorry to keep going on, but the image, the idea that his initial response after being shot in the head was to jump up and roar like a lion.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, that's like he's like now a world historical figure. Like he exists, as far as I'm concerned, like with 1 foot in time and 1 foot in eternity. I mean, I know that sounds like totally bonkers and the sort of thing that the Democrats always accuse us of doing. But I really feel like he is now like, he's split time.
He's secured his position on the pages of history books across the world. I mean, there are kids in like Uganda acting out his reaction.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite the there's a piano getting tuned in the background. I'm broadcasting from an undisclosed but secure location in Cape Cod. Forgive us, everyone, the feedback and weirdness. But yeah, I mean, talk about a final act for Trump. I mean, the real estate mogul, child of privilege, kid from the Bronx, multiple time presidential candidate, finally wins in 2016, gets defeated in 2020, is now looking like may get reelected, do one of the very rare feats in American history, which is to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. It's only happened once before. That's right, guys? Garfield.
Yeah.
And it's just
So Cleveland.
Sorry, thank you, Seth.
Cleveland.
Yeah.
Garfield
That's
was
right.
killed.
Garfield was shot. Yeah. It's just extraordinary. People may have seen there's this computer simulation that's timed to Trump's head turn on the internet that's floating around Twitter/X, where you see the reality of what we missed and what he missed. Providential luck, call it what you want. I mean, it's just extraordinary. And I think I don't think the left fully appreciates, or even a good portion of the right for that matter, how bad it would have been had Trump's head exploded on live television. For us, for the Republic, for this regime. We just, I wrote a piece for our new feature, which everyone should check out on this whole business. And the subhead, which was not mine, I think either Seth probably wrote it, but Donald Trump and America each dodged a bullet. That was the subhead for my piece, The Shot Heard Around the World. And that's definitely true. It's, even I mentioned in the piece that even Matt Continetti, sort of never Trumper of good standing on the commentary podcast that they recorded on Sunday, just basically echoed what you said, Spencer, which was, Trump has entered the pantheon of great, courageous men. I mean, to get up from that with blood streaming down your face and to think the first thing I want to do is signal to the crowd. I mean, Trump, of course, has always had a very good sense of media and imagery, so that's not surprising. But just to have the I don't want to say calm, but the collection to do it immediately. None of us know what we'd do when we just caught an AR-15 round through the ear and had a bunch of Secret Service members dogpiling us to prevent us from getting shot a second time. I mean, just the whole thing is just crazy. His survival, as with, even if he got shot, will reverberate through our politics in ways that we cannot yet predict. So we're on a wild ride, and I think we're on the better path of the two, obviously. And so for that, we should be grateful. Well, that's good. I mean, we all joked, it's going to be an interesting 2024, and man, it's delivered so far in spades. Let's hope this has been the most exciting thing we'll see in the next few months.
I mean, I talked to someone in Trump's inner circle a while ago.
Yeah.
6 months ago. And she said her main concern was that he would be killed. And she said he's not good. He doesn't like having Secret Service around him. At his golf clubs or whatever, he'll tell them to go away, stand away from me. And those places don't have great security. And it's kind of I know everybody's worried about this, but I just pray that now it's taken much more seriously, and that I don't care if he doesn't do any more rallies. I just want, as far as I'm concerned, he can go do a basement campaign.
Yeah,
that's what he should. I want him out of harm's way.
That's That's what he looks like. He doesn't look like he's planning to do that, but he looks like he doesn't have a man who has nothing left to prove to himself. When he walks into that RNC room, just with this, I don't know, I'm the last person who would expect myself to be talking this way, but with this kind of serenity about him. I mean, I was kidding sort of about God endorsing Donald Trump with this moment, but if you believe, as I do, that God intervenes in history and not just sculpts the world, but also personally takes a hand in it, it's almost impossible. Whatever intentions you want to attribute to God, or whether you want to leave that unknown, it is impossible to look at that video and not just think, there's like you're watching divine intervention in real time.
Yeah.
And then that thing that he did with the fist, it's like simultaneously the most significant thing he's ever done and the Trumpiest thing he's ever done at once, which really does, I think, like, I feel it sort of must have cinched the campaign, although that's, of course, a foolish thing to say, given how insane the turmoil has been so far. We're only halfway through the year. On the point, Seth, about like people celebrating or wishing that this had gone a different way, because you're now seeing all of these campaigns to like get people fired from Home Depot because they say, you know, I wish the shooter had had better aim. And I had an encounter with one of these people that I tweeted about, just like there are people who are living in, I really think it's a cloud of unreality that this is just a cutesy word game that they play with their other liberal friends. But all of that having been said, you know, every time there's a shooting or some crazy person takes it into his head to do something for these deranged political reasons, I have always said, like, the person responsible is the person whose finger pulls the trigger. So I'm not going to stop that now. And it is on Crooks and nobody else, this assassination attempt. But I think we would be remiss not to talk about the role of the press in creating that atmosphere where otherwise decent, nice people who think of themselves as the good guy can snicker to each other about, wouldn't it have been great if, in fact, he could have just gotten taken out on all of our behalfs. I mean, the New Republic, 6 days before this happened, put out, I think, Ryan, you posted this, a cover about the new American fascism with Donald Trump photoshopped into Hitler. He had the mustache. It was kind of done in this Hitlerian style. And that's just a physical, stark representation of what people in the press, the New York Times, the Washington Post, all over the commentariat online have been saying explicitly and implicitly in completely bald, plain terms, po-faced, without irony, for 8 years. And if we just step back for a second and ask, and I don't think that the people in the press really ever ask this, but if we ask, like, what is the implication of taking this seriously? If we do them the courtesy of imagining that they use words to mean things that they intend to say, and then translate the idea that Donald Trump is the new Hitler, that his second election, his re-election, would represent an existential threat to democracy, that this is basically our moment to grapple with the possibility of a dictator and a coup and the total overthrow of our system. Let's even go so far as to say that doesn't necessarily mean that if you believe that, you personally would go and try to assassinate Donald Trump. But what would you want in that scenario if you believed that this seriously is our Hitler? Mm-hmm. Wouldn't you have to desire that somebody take him out before he gets into office? Like, isn't that the only logical conclusion? If you were living in Germany and you knew about Hitler what we know about Hitler, wouldn't the moral thing be to hope that somebody kills him? And if Trump really were like threatening to overthrow the government, wouldn't somebody have the responsibility? I mean, all I'm saying here is, like, what other course of action can you expect somebody to take who seriously believes what the media have been saying about Trump these many years? And how can you distance yourself from that if you're a member of the press who has said those things? And how can you claim to be against political violence if you genuinely believe and say that all the time?
It's hard, Spencer. I don't think you can. I often wonder, with the gap between the public rhetoric of the media and the political class, because we've seen leaked recently, or maybe leak isn't quite the right word, but many on the congressional Democratic side, I forget who said it first, but someone said, like, look, I mean, it's, we'll survive another 4 years of Trump. So their private rhetoric and sentiments, I think a lot of them are wildly out of step with their public rhetoric. And I should hope that this event has chastened them in that regard. Yeah, I don't. I mean, I'm just at a loss for words, frankly. I mean, I do wonder how many of them actually believe it, that we're on the verge of Hitler. That New Republic cover story actually was a little older, Spencer. It came out in May, but I think
Oh,
yeah, no,
sorry.
it's fine. One of the pieces which I read with a lot of interest because it intersects with some areas of study of mine was, what will this mean for law and the executive? And the author went through. I think maybe I mentioned this a month ago on the podcast. I can't remember, but the author went through some of the things that would result from a Trump presidency as far as executive action goes. And it was things like he will fire more of the bureaucracy than we normally would. He will exercise the powers of the presidency, including the powers of prosecution at his disposal through the attorney general's office in his own interest. He'll I mean, I forget exactly the details of one of them, but basically, this isn't how they put it, or the author put it, but it was basically he'll kind of restore the separation of powers. I mean, the litany of horribles was what a lot of us hope for constitutional government. So there's just this wild divergence between how we've understood constitutional small r Republican government to work and how modern liberalism and progressivism thinks it should work after 100 years of the progressive transformation of the Constitution, including the separation of powers and other things. So this, in a way, this is kind of the evolution of the 2016 campaign from the left. They really did think that part of the reason they were so shocked and their response was so radioactive in many ways and extra constitutional was, I think they really did think that a Democratic presidency under Hillary Clinton would be the final kind of death blow to what they consider to be reactionary constitutional republicanism, small r. So I view this response after the 4 years of Trump and then in the 4 intervening years, or almost 4, of Trump being on the public scene, it has had this sort of ratcheting effect, and so viewing that, we should view that rhetoric in that sense. They really thought they were on the cusp of permanent rule, and it was overturned by this reality TV star, flashy businessman who'd never been in politics before. So I think that's still just so shocking to everyone that it leads to I don't know, a kind of arms race or extreme rhetoric. Yeah, a rhetorical arms race. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But the thing is, the effect of that, like you were saying, Spencer, has been to prime like some element of the population to do what they secretly want. Like, yes. Google The Guardian Trump covers or New Yorker Trump covers, and okay, multiple ones of him like with a Klan hat. There's lots of Nazi stuff associated with it. Der Spiegel had him beheading the Statue of Liberty and holding the head out with like it's like bleeding stump and all this stuff. This has been like a constant drumbeat, begging losers and inverts and weirdos to like start doing target practice. I mean, this guy Crooks, okay, Trump became president when he was like 12. Okay, so for 8 years, his entire life as like, maybe once he came to political consciousness around that age, has been like, oh, Trump is Hitler. Trump is Hitler. And I don't care if he's a Republican, whatever. It's like, there's been basically like this mass brainwashing strategy, PSYOP type thing, to get somebody out of like the 10 million most disgruntled, like weird Americans, one of them to do it. Another thing, but one thing I'm really kind of concerned about, I wrote this piece about it like in the few hours after the shooting, is this tendency, which I now see growing, and I think it's going to continue, and not just among like, really kind of out of it people, is that it was all staged, that it was manufactured. It didn't really happen. Right. Trump was not shot. Right. It was a false flag, and he didn't really care. Yes, and of course they killed people, but that was part of it in order to give him like like a talking point or to and there's this anger and bitterness that picture came out. And people saying, "Oh, it has such fascist overtones." It's like, well, it's just a photograph. He didn't take it. Like some liberal photographer took it. But this idea that it didn't happen and that it was fake, I think this is going to be with us forever. Which kind of really makes me angry and sickens me.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I find the whole thing has been very very upsetting.
Yeah. No, I mean, not only is this the first assassination attempt in my lifetime of this profile, but it's the first assassination attempt ever in the age of hyper-precise real-time media capture. So it's the first time we've ever seen what it looks like if something like this happens and you don't just get grainy shots that somebody happened to be able to capture, but you get literally the air trail of the bullet and you get digital 3D simulations of Trump's head movements in the time. And the effect of this is certainly one of what I think is called hyper reality, that on the one hand, if you are basically living in the world where the general narrative that everybody kind of agrees on is roughly what happened, then you can have this minute, granular experience almost of the thing and all of the associated emotional reactions, good, bad, ugly, whatever. And I think that mostly that has been in Trump's favor, not that he engineered it that way, but that his actual actions, his real life actions were in fact quite admirable and striking. And so people have responded. On the other hand, of course, it's also the age of the deepfake. And just because that concept has been so slovenly and cheapened in the mouth of Karine Jean-Pierre doesn't mean that that's not a thing that computers are now able to do. And as you say, Seth, that's never going away. It weirdly puts me in mind, bear with me here, it puts me in mind of Candace Owens recently did this whole shtick where she decided that she doesn't believe the earth is flat and she doesn't believe the earth is round either. She's just been released from the tyranny of science. And this resurrects a particular stance that some flat earthers have, which is basically the earth might be round, it might be flat, but how do you know? Because you've never been. If you've not flown around it or whatever, you're just accepting the authority of the scientists. And this is actually, in some sense, true, except that nobody can live this way. If you actually want to go through life only believing the things that you personally have verified, you'll never believe in Australia. I mean, you won't believe in like your cousin that you've never met. So there is this weird sort of reality of modern life that we have to sort of rely on other people and their testimony. And now that is kind of breaking down, you are seeing people who are just having to like grasp onto the sources of information that they prefer. And since it's impossible to live in a world where you only believe things you personally have verified, what you do instead is you just filter all data and information through your personal preferred coping mechanism, whatever it is that makes you feel best or safest or more secure. So in this case, like it's in various people's interests to believe that various aspects of this aren't real. Either if you're a lefty, you want it to have been staged for Trump. If you're on the fringe right, you might want some of it to have been engineered by the left to a higher degree of coordination than I think is reasonable. But you're always like in these margins, you know, it is a huge problem that you are confecting this reality out of whichever images you choose to believe, since the fake ones and the real ones increasingly look like each other. All of which simply brings me back to my blazing and passionate hatred for our legacy media. Really, this just funnels deeper into the heat sink of rage that I have about how the press has behaved over the last several decades, because if that hadn't been our normal for these years, then we probably wouldn't have quite so many people ready to believe that whatever you're being told is a lie. Like, the problem that we have here is, like, yes, one of technology, but it's one compounded by this collapse of trust in one another and in our sources of information. And that's simply a crime. Like, that is just like a collective sin on the part of the people that run our major press outlets.
Well, I'll just end by saying, or end our little section here. It is quite ironic that Trump's one of his leading talking lines in 2016, that the fake news media is the enemy of the people. All they did was confirm that fact in the immediate aftermath of him almost getting assassinated.
Regarding that Candace Owens thing, she also doubts the moon landing, right? Like that. Sure. Not only doubts it, but laughs about it. Like, you'd have to be an idiot. So, like, there's this idea of the non-dupe heirs, right? The non-dupe heir. But it's like, it's like this Lacanian pun. Like, the non-dupe will not stray. But they're always the one who strays, because they're so convinced of their own critical powers to see through that. They're not going to be the dummies. They're going to see through every narrative, because every narrative is a false narrative. So there's like a difference between, there's two kinds of skepticism. There's like terminal skepticism and radical skepticism. And like a terminal skepticism is like essentially the same thing as solipsism. Like, I can't know anything for sure, so I will just make up whatever I want. The stars, they're just like bits of fire a few miles away. Like, we could reach them and extinguish them if we wanted to. And then radical skepticism is kind of an understanding, like, yes, there is, like, my own perceptions are not perfect, and my interpretive capacities are not perfect, but there's a way, by constantly checking reality versus what I'm making of it and what other people say, that you can, like, come up with a workable way of, like, dealing with the world and interpreting it. And I feel like with the internet and with the constant manufacturing of, like, crises and counter narratives, and today I learned, or why didn't they tell me in school that slavery was really bad? Like, the proliferation of this type of debunking. So everybody's like a debunker. It's just toxic. And then you've got people like Candace Owens just saying the most insane, stupid nonsense. Let me just point out one thing about the moon landing. Like, people say the moon landing didn't happen, but then why did they keep faking the next 5 moon landings? And did they also fake the one that didn't work, like Apollo 13? Like when they had to, like, abort it.
I love that point in your essay, Seth. And this is just the tammest roundtableist thing to be doing. Exceptionally on brand to turn this podcast about an assassination attempt into, like, an hour-long seminar on epistemology. But I do think that, for me, the most important part of what you just said, Seth, about, like, a healthy epistemology and the different ingredients that go into helpful skepticism, or workable stance toward information in the world. The most important part of that, perhaps especially now, is other people. You mentioned, like, checking yourself against other people, and who are the people that you hold up your ideas and your views against? Obviously, how do we know what is true is, like, one of the oldest philosophy questions in the book. And one thing I've noticed about, in, say, the Hellenistic era, you get all these guys, the Stoics and the Epicureans, and these names that we now know, like, arguing over what's called the criterion of truth, the touchstone, where if you have this, then you know that that's true. And so from that, you can build to this and whatever. And because they're all philosophers, inevitably, they always want it to be this like one-on-one relationship between the all-powerful individual mind, like the perfect, pure, rational mind, and the world, with no like third term intervening, because this is what philosophers tend to want, is to sit in their rooms and like perfect thought. But there's actually no perfect system like that that gets you out of having somebody else, at least one other person in the room, to be like, hey, did you see that? Did you see what I saw? And all of these systems kind of falter on the unwillingness to concede a degree of personal humility and creaturely limitedness. So that what you actually need is a community of observers with a set of agreed upon standards. And we all know that that has like broken down in the 2000s and thereafter for innumerable reasons, like waves hands about, gestures vaguely at everything. Yes, I personally am incandescent with rage about the press, and I do think they have a lot to answer for here, but you've also got the way in which our current like media for communication, our digital technology, sort of alienate us from one another. And you've got the fact that many of our moral premises are sort of fundamentally irreconcilable. So you do kind of land yourself back at, unless you can find some group of people that can kind of check you and whom you can listen to when they tell you you've got something wrong, you're pretty sunk. And I think this goes for like individuals, but also for why the vibe shift after this event has been a little weirdly silver liningsy for me, because you do feel like actually there was this huge cloud that was kicked up, this just total fake narrative about Trump is Hitler, everybody hates Hitler, all good people hate Trump. And then that smacked up against reality, and this crooks dweeb comes out with a gun. As you say, Seth, any psychopath in this country could basically have done this. And in fact, it turns out like most people, the like lib sociopaths out there are sort of wishing the bullet had made contact, but a lot of people, and not just diehard Republicans, like, the Teamster speaking at the RNC convention, and these sort of island of misfit toys weirdos that are gravitating around the RNC, and that like tech bros or whatever are all sort of like, no, like this is not actually Hitler. We don't actually want him dead. And I think like leaning into that is probably the smartest thing that Trump is doing right now. It's just like that there's a reality check element to moments like this that encourage us actually to circle the wagons and say, no, we all saw the same picture, right? Like we're all agreed that you don't kill presidential candidates and that this guy is not some weird exception to that. Like, okay, cool. So like maybe we can huddle around that a little bit more. Anyway, I've been going on too long, and we should talk about the RNC more generally. I want to know what you guys think of this. So we're like 2 days in, I guess, as of this recording. Day 3 is going on while we're talking, so we haven't seen any of those speeches. But each one has been oriented around a different adjective that we want to make America again. So we had make America wealthy again. We had make America safe again, so on and so forth. I think this today might be make America strong again, although I'm not totally sure of that. At the same time, we've also now got a vice presidential pick. Trump, in Trumpian fashion, sort of teased this until the last minute, named a bunch of different candidates, but finally went with JD Vance, senator from Ohio. It's a bold pick, like most VP picks. I think its major functioning is as a signal, and the signal it sends is the future of the party is like MAGA post-Trump populism. After Trump leaves the stage, he is not content for things to sort of reset to whatever the previous mean is. He's saying, like, my presumptive successor, my right-hand man, is going to be formerly anti-Trump, now bullishly pro-Trump, working class, hillbilly elegy, ferociously eloquent, populist, economically kind of left of the Republican Party's traditional center, JD Vance. So that's a major deal. And so are some of these names of people that have spoken at this event. I mentioned the fellow that the Teamster, the head of the Teamsters Association, who spoke at the RNC. I also, in my intro, mentioned Amber Rose, who is this kind of like woman of ill repute, I guess, but she's like a Kanye adjacent celebrity. You've got people speaking very movingly about the children they've lost to fentanyl poisoning because of Biden's open border, people talking about how they've suffered under the very real policies and their very real implications under Biden. So just like all in all, I think a kind of motley crew, but with a very distinctive flavor made to signal the shape of the new Republican Party, which is kind of what the RNC is doing. It's just all taking place in this very heightened way where not only have we just had this assassination attempt, but we also have a party and a series of parties that are undergoing this radical reappraisal. And what do you guys think? Am I making too much of this? What have we learned from the last couple of days? What do you make of it?
Yeah, I think that all that's right, Spencer. I think the more interesting, well, not more interesting, but another very interesting aspect of this is, I mean, Vance must be the youngest VP pick in a long time. I mean, he'll be 40 in like 3 weeks. So it's also a sign of the generational transfer of power and influence and all the rest. So I find it very interesting for that reason. We have some Claremont Institute fellows who are on JD's staff, quite a few actually, and we've been friends with Vance, and he's spoken at our events before, so it's exciting for us for that reason. I think he's giving the keynote tonight, right? I think the VP speaks on Wednesday, and then Trump will speak tomorrow. I could be wrong about that, but no, it's quite the contrast with the other party, which is struggling right now in a kind of death struggle to try and replace their almost 80-year-old candidate who seems to be faltering even more by the day, more and more.
Almost 80 on the wrong side.
Yeah, that's right. More and more by the day. So the contrast is striking. I mean, you have at the top of the ticket 2 members of the greatest generation, and then you have in JD Vance. I mean, he's not even Gen X, right? He's a millennial, solidly.
He's a millennial.
Yeah, solidly a millennial.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all very exciting for that reason, and it's interesting. You know, the old. I've been struck by some of the old guard of the various parts of the 3-legged stool of conservatism reacting with some horror at JD, whether it's over his economic policies, as you mentioned, Spencer, or his sort of populism. But I can't help but regard these effusions online as kind of last gasps of an old order. And I would say good riddance. You know, JD is, from those of us who've observed him up close, whatever you think of his evolution in the party in recent years, or from never Trump to a VP candidate, you know, he's an intelligent guy. He's very articulate, as you said, Spencer. I almost said clean and articulate, but that's a throwback.
Really surprisingly, yeah, for somebody that
it's a throwback to a different era. Yeah, so I think the whole thing's pretty exciting. We'll see it. We'll see how it shakes out. It will be very interesting. I saw today news, maybe it was yesterday or late last night, that the 2 parties have agreed to a vice presidential debate, which I think, you know, talk about a study in contrasts. The sort of, in many ways, Nepo baby Kamala Harris, although not by birth, but by sort of mentorship, Willie Brown, California, all the rest, going up against Vance. It will be among. Well, I mentioned in our last segment that we should hope that the most surprising thing or arresting thing about this campaign was the failed assassination attempt, but we're in store for, I think, some more fireworks. So I say bring it on.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I don't know a huge amount about JD Vance. I'm heartened by his enemies because they're my enemies. So as far as that goes, I feel like he was a good pick. I think I was very pleased that I feel like there were people who wanted Trump to pick like Burgum, like that guy, the South Dakota governor, whatever it is he is, sorry. And that would have just been like kind of like a cipher choice. And that's sort of like, that would be like the old Trump, like just picking some stand-in who's not going to detract attention. But this just showed like the mature Trump. It's like exactly as Ryan was saying, like, or as I guess as you were saying, Spencer, like he's thinking about what happens after he's not the leader of the party anymore. MAGA cannot die with Trump. Like, so it has to go on. The one weird thing I think, and nobody has anybody even mentioned this, like, okay, the last vice president America had who had any facial hair was Charles Curtis. Okay. And that was a really long time ago. And he had a mustache. The last president with a full beard was Benjamin Harrison. So we're going way back. I mean, nobody has a full beard in politics. I mean, Cruz grew one after he sort of like left presidential politics, but it's very unusual in the realm of saying, like, national politics.
So, Seth, are you saying that the future belongs to bearded millennial Yale graduates? Because I really I'd like to cut a jib here.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. You're right, Seth.
I mean, on this team, on this podcast, we all have beards.
The three of us have beards.
We are all bearded. Naturally going to be, and James. So we're all going to be like
bearded American now.
That's right. Famously fashion. Well known at the Claremont Institute for being fashion forward, and especially at the Roundtable for hopping on trends, especially sartorial trends, early in advance. Yeah, that is really actually pretty interesting, Seth. And it's not like beards have been ideologically insignificant in political history. This is like one of the major, the beard of the king is like one of the most primal kind of symbols in ancient iconography. There were disputes amid the Romans and the Greeks over whether beards were sort of effeminate and Asiatic or whether they represented manly daring do and virility. Yeah. So I think if fashions are changing in this respect, it's just another sign of a sea change. I do think that
Schopenhauer said the beard is half a mask and should be forbidden by the police.
Schopenhauer, noted lib. So like get pwned, get wrecked, Schopenhauer. Yeah, I mean, I think this idea of like, let's look at who's getting mad about this whole week is kind of instructive, Seth, because it's not famously. Your vice president is not necessarily the person that's going to be making policy. So I'm less concerned about what has JD Vance said at various points in his career about what laws he wants to write or whatever. I mean, there may come a time when we look at that more closely, but right now it's more of an exercise in branding and signaling, and much like the RNC convention, it tells you a little bit about where Trump sees the future of his movement going. And there's kind of two groups of people right now that are big mad. One of them is you've already mentioned, and that is the old guard neocon right, the foreign policy hawks, the free market maximalists, the people that find Vance's whole suite of attitudes just distasteful and even unconservative, that it doesn't represent whatever they mean when they say conservatism. And then the other group of people that are big mad is you would say the morality maximalists, like the people who want the Republican Party to represent or embody just precisely those values that they consider pure. And I don't want to sneer at these people too much, because many of the values that they endorse and espouse are my values also. And those of their values that are not my values are perfectly respectable or even admirable ideals to have. Some of them represent deep running traditions in the country. That having been said, as modes of political purity, they are perfectly ineffectual right now. I mean, there is just a way in which this purism about like who gets to call himself or herself a Republican voter is obviously not the successful strategy, and therefore, importantly, not the correct means for getting conservative values into the White House. Like, even if you think the White House should be occupied by people who more strenuously represent like a right-wing conservative set of social attitudes. The question before us now is like which of the two parties and which of the two candidates is more likely to bring about a shift in that direction? The answer to that question is obvious. And so then the question is simply strategically like, how do you move that person into the White House? And Trump's answer basically seems to be, we give as many people a route into this whole MAGA thing as possible. We just open up as many doors as we can. And that has involved like some really out of pocket appearances at the RNC. I mentioned Amber Rose. Like, there was also anger about Harmeet Dillon, somebody who, full disclosure, is a person I consider a friend and whom I admire enormously as like a legal crusader for the right. And she was invited to give a benediction. She's a Sikh, so she prayed in Punjabi to the God who Sikhs believe in and who I think is basically like, just God, sort of like garden variety. Most people could sign on to the things that come from the Sikh God being godly things. People get very mad about that because it's like, it's not Christianity, and I agree, it's not. But both with the Vance pick and with the like big tent mood of this RNC, I do think we're seeing a very smart move from Trump, which is like, we're just not going to be sticklers about any of this stuff. Like, now is not the time. You like shelve your white papers about why JD Vance said something that would be economically disastrous one time. Shelve your imprecations to like cast over the idols of Baal because somebody's like not somebody is not like your particular brand of Tridentine Catholic or whatever. Tridentine might be a kind of gum, I don't know. But anyway, the just like come off it, I think, is kind of the like slogan of this RNC. And I, just like everybody, I have pressure points in these discussions where I could get offended. But my instinct is like, nah, this is probably the right way. This is probably the good strategy.
A lot of social conservatives are upset by the platform change on the abortion question. And we should be clear, for those who haven't looked at it, it's not like the Republican Party has become pro-choice, but there was some retreating on the issue of a life amendment through the 14th Amendment and also opposition to birth control. But I tell social conservative friends, look, the hour is late in America. The Republic is corrupt. It's sliding into oligarchy. It has been for a long time. And you can fight these fights when they actually matter. That is to say, when they drive policy. But for now, I think we should, or they should, wait and see. And I think that the mode, Trump's mode and his team's mode, I think, Spencer, you're exactly right, is to try to build a supermajority party. And so that's what's driving this for them. And, you don't get anything done if you don't win. That is not to say that you need to compromise all your principles in order to garner the largest majority. But I don't get the sense from knowing how these people operate and knowing some of the arguments about some of these changes that that's what they're up to. So maybe there are more shoes to drop. And this is, the SOCONs, the really cynical social conservatives say this is the beginning of the end for the pro-life movement in the Republican Party. We'll see. I mean, consider me pretty skeptical, especially in light of the things that Trump did in his first administration, which was to appoint judges that got the thing done that they wanted done for 50 years, which was to overturn Roe v. Wade. So I think a little more charity and generosity is in order. And then, look, just keep an eye on them. And remember that politicians always let us down. That's what they do. They're in that business. So there will be ways in which Trump lets us down. Or JD lets us down, or whatever. Fight those fights when they come. Bring your cogent arguments to the table and try to persuade your fellow social conservatives and the wider tent of the Republican Party. But in the meantime, I think this is all pretty interesting and a breath of fresh air given the tendencies towards stodginess and irrelevancy of some of the spirit of previous Republican conventions.
Yeah. I after the whole Amber Rose thing, and everybody was like, well, some social conservative types were like really worked up about it. Like, why are we platforming a slut? So I looked up like some polling on Griswold versus Connecticut. Like, how many Americans want Griswold overturned? Okay, like 10%.
And we should remind our listeners, Seth, that it was the case that upheld it sort of initiated in many ways the right to privacy, and the details of the case considered a state law that forbade contraception.
Yeah, between married couples, like allowing married couples in Connecticut to buy contraceptives. So, okay, all right. If you want to fight the good fight of like trying to appeal to the 10% of Americans who think that married people shouldn't be allowed to use contraception, I mean, good luck to you. I mean, this is like, look, you can stamp your feet all you want and try to make it like that this is Kansas in 1930. And we have, and it's a dry state, and there's no like square dancing is kind of frowned on, or whatever it is that they want. It's just not going to happen. It's just not realistic. I mean, it's just not America. It's like, look outside at what's going on and tell me that that's like the biggest problem.
Man, you're really spoiling my plans to stage a pro dancing revolution in my small farming town, accompanied by
I believe
70s.
I will clock that as the first oblique footloose reference in the history of this podcast.
You got to turn it around and pick your feet off the ground, Ryan. Come on, get with it. Get hip to the jive. Yeah, I do think we've never yet had a musical theater reference on this show, which, given our crew, is sort of surprising. But yeah, this is like, if you want a Bible verse to sort of invoke here, and I'm being quite serious, like in Matthew, when other people are casting out demons in Jesus' name, and his disciples come and say, like, other people are casting out demons, what should we do? He says, if they're not against me, they're for me, which is like, I had to look that up because I was trying to think, it can't be that, right? It must be if they're not for me, they're against me. Like, it must be more exclusive. But actually, no, like, he goes out of his way to say, if you're not against me, you are for me. And I think, like, when you're talking about the cult of death, right, which is basically the alternative, and then you're talking about somebody that wants to pray, like in Punjabi, to a god that gives healing, to the one God who gives healing and humility and courage, like, I'm sorry, but our list of allies grows thin, my friends. Like that. So you do need everybody that you can get on board, and you need the good guys, like, roughly speaking, and you need to not be precious about it, especially under these circumstances. And then you have to ask yourself the question, like, would you rather be wrestling with your fellow travelers over small disagreements that you might conceivably put into action if you win these internal fights? Or would you rather be impotently shaking your fist at the behemoth powers who hate you, who hold every major political office? And I mean that question genuinely, because I think that somewhere in their hearts, there are like people who actually do prefer the latter option and do prefer like impotent purism to actionable disputes where you compromise and you get some things that you want, you don't get other things that you don't want, like politics, wielding power in politics. And I'm sorry, but like, I would like to win, and then I would like to have like some arguments among the people who have done the winning. And I think we need to probably wrap this up, because I'm sure we could like go on in these various riffs for a long time, but we do want to bring you a segment that I think missed last time, which is read the damn site. We do have a website, and we don't just pal around on the podcast. We also publish, I think, really excellent work. And I am going to take the privilege of hosting this week to make the first endorsement and roundly endorse The Shot Heard Around the World by Ryan Williams, not just because the author is present on the podcast, but because this really is, I think, one of the definitive, if you read only a few pieces about this seminal moment in our history, there was a lot of noise, obviously, after this came out, but Ryan brought the goods, as indeed is his role as our fearless leader, and really just sort of approached this with the sobriety and the seriousness it deserved, but also the kind of forceful moral clarity, and rightly invokes Mike Anton's famous 2016 essay, The Flight 93 Election, as kind of the framing device for thinking about this moment that we're in. The Shot Heard Around the World by Ryan Williams, kicking off a feature on the assassination attempt, which you should also check out. Okay, Seth, what do you got?
In the same feature, I really liked Tim O'Brien's piece, No Going Back, just talking about, like he says, Trump's characteristic aggressiveness has long left him open to accusations of disingenuousness, callousness, and shallowness. That changed on Saturday. And, just it's a nice statement of how this whole thing played out. A lot of the stuff we were talking about today and, Trump's raw courage and, basically the meaning of that moment. So I would recommend that piece and the whole feature, honestly. No Going Back by Tim O'Brien.
Yep, absolutely. Ryan, what do you got?
I would like to recommend Jeremy Carl's No Rotten Miracles, where he starts out by invoking the Princess Bride, but the subhead of which is reviving the constitutional order will require heroic national effort. And Jeremy is generously speaking to some on the right these days, Orrin McIntyre and others, who say the Constitution is dead. And he admits in sober fashion that it's definitely at least on life support, but makes a case for the possibility of renewal, which I think is precisely the right message now. It's something that we and our allies are working on and hope some of us to work on in a second Trump administration. So Jeremy typically in this piece is realistic about the hurdles we face and the difficulty ahead of us, but is not despairing and is intelligent and learned throughout. So go read No Rotten Miracles.
Yeah, nobody quite hits the mark like Jeremy, I think, when it comes to seriousness about the state of our decline, coupled with resistance to despair. I think he really manages to navigate that well, which is hard to do and important to do under the present circumstances. We hope we've done that a little bit for you this week. And as always, we're very grateful that you choose us among the various voices with whom you might fill your precious and valuable time. If you want to know more about the work that we do, you can always visit our website. It's not just AmericanMind.org, but also ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, where you'll find our sister publication, the Claremont Review of Books. And if you'd like to donate to support our work, you can go to claremont.org/donate, which we appreciate enormously. Whatever amount you wish to kick our way, that helps us keep the lights on, and we're very, very grateful for it. Finally, don't forget to check out our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. Thanks very much to our production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Logan Zeppieri, and thanks to you all for listening. We will talk to you next week.